Hello there if you're an Aries, or if you carry the fire of a warrior who's always had to be strong. Then this space is for you. Because there's something not many dare to say out loud. Your silence is the most beautiful cry for help. No one sees you cry, no one hears you fall. And yet you're still here, breathing, fighting, alone. So today, let's take the armor off just for a moment. Sit with me, gently, and let's begin this journey together. A journey into the deepest part of an Aries soul, where we'll start with one question. What truly hides behind the glory of a warrior who always leads the way? Part 1 will tell you. Aries was born to lead. No one taught them how to pave the way, they just walked, led by instinct, by the beating of their heart, by a strange pull from somewhere far beyond, and maybe from the soul itself. The world looks at Aries and thinks, that one's strong. She's fearless. He always knows what he wants and never backs down. But has anyone ever stopped long enough to really look into the eyes of an Aries, to see that behind the blazing fire is a loneliness without shape, a kind of emptiness even they don't know how to name? Aries is the fire that leads, the first to run into the storm, believing in ideals, in love, in justice. They'll burn for someone they care about, stand up for what's right, even when it costs them everything. And then, when night falls, when the crowd fades and the applause is gone, they're left alone with themselves. No one ever asks if they're tired. No one realizes, while they're holding that flame together day after day, they're also burning out. Aries doesn't know how to complain. They don't say, I'm tired. They don't say, I'm hurting. They don't say, I need rest. Because somewhere along the way, they were taught or forced to believe that if they fall, no one's going to catch them. So they keep standing, keep holding, keep fighting, and stay silent. But that silence isn't peace. It's the deepest cry for help. Not loud, not angry, not in tears. Just the softest sighs that no one hears. Just nights when they turn off their phone. Not to hide, but because they're too tired to explain. Just mornings where they open their eyes and whisper to themselves, you still have to be strong today. Their loneliness isn't about being alone. It's about being misunderstood. About being the one everyone leans on, the one who's not allowed to break. But who set that rule, who built that prison? Maybe it was them, because deep down they believe, if they're not strong, who's going to keep the fire alive? So they walk through the darkest seasons of life alone. No one sees it. No one knows how many times they almost collapsed. Behind that determined smile, how many invisible losses they carry. After every so-called victory, and every time someone leaves, they learn again. You have to get back up. You have to bandage yourself. You have to keep going. People often ask, why are the strongest ones always the loneliest? Maybe because they're the last ones left. The ones everyone assumes will always be okay. Always ready, always able. But the truth is they're human too. They need a hug. They need a safe place to fall. They need someone to look at them and say, it's okay to rest. But they rarely ask for that because they're afraid if they let their guard down, they won't know how to pick it back up. They're afraid of pity in someone's eyes, afraid of disappointing the ones who see them as unbreakable. So they live behind that mask of strength. A mask they wore for so long they forgot how to take it off. They protect the world, but no one sees the weight they carry inside. Yet if you've ever loved an Aries, if you've lived close enough for long enough, you'll feel it. That quiet place inside them, a shadowed corner of the soul. They don't let anyone enter. It's where the pain sleeps and where their truest self still lives. Aries doesn't talk about their wounds, not because they don't hurt, but because they don't want to be a burden. They think everyone has their own pain, and so they carry one more day with the smile of someone undefeated, with the eyes of someone who knows the way. But deep inside, there's a void, and it grows still. Not all emptiness is a tragedy. Sometimes that space is where something new begins, a quiet return to the self, a moment of stillness just long enough to ask, why am I carrying so much? Why can't I give myself permission to rest? Is there anyone who truly understands me? And in that moment, the fire begins to shift, from blazing red to a softer gold, from physical force to emotional strength, from warrior to keeper. That's when Aries begins to see, not every battle needs to be fought. Not everyone deserves your flame, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop, step back, be quiet, and listen to yourself. Maybe the most painful thing for an Aries isn't being left behind, it's being misunderstood. Right at the moment they're trying to save themselves from falling apart, They get called cold, distant, too proud. But no one stops to ask, was today hard for you? Do you want someone to listen? And maybe that's where it all begins, this silent truth. Aries, because they love the world too much, choose silence to protect themselves. Their fire never truly goes out, it just burns quietly now, waiting not to fight, but to warm their own heart first. So what created that silence? What made a soul so full of fire walk away from everything? Maybe the answer lies in the softest place of all, the place in their heart that still hurts too easily. There's something strange about the way the world looks at Aries. Everyone sees their strength, their decisiveness, the way they walk forward without ever looking back, as if nothing could hurt them anymore. But the truth is, no one sees the one thing that matters most. Behind that tough armor lies an incredibly sensitive heart. A heart so fragile that even the tiniest crack can bring their whole inner world crashing down. Aries loves for real, with a raw, primal kind of fire. They love like there's no tomorrow, and because they love so deeply, when trust breaks, they have no idea how to put those pieces back together. A word said at the wrong time, an action that seemed harmless, one moment of not being protected when they needed it most. That's all it takes for them to shut down, to pull away, to build a wall cold, solid, and impossible to cross. People think Aries is angry, but no, they're trying to patch up a heart that just cracked, not with tears, but with silence. Silence to ask themselves, was I wrong to believe? Silence to avoid explaining their emotions to someone who was never truly listening. Silence as one final act of love for themselves. You know, Aries rarely blames others. They just quietly step back because they believe. If you have to explain too much just to be understood, then maybe the connection was never that deep. And when trust breaks, what they lose isn't just a relationship. They lose a part of their own light. That light doesn't disappear, it simply dims, waiting for someone patient enough, gentle enough to help bring it back. But most people aren't that patient, so Aries learns to light their own way, even if it's just a flicker, even in the darkest night. Their armor, it's not for show, not to scare anyone, not to push people away. It's there to protect the softest part of themselves, the part they can't risk breaking again. You might see them laugh, see them keep going, keep giving, keep showing up for everyone else, but don't confuse being busy with being okay. Because often, behind that steady gaze is a heart waiting for someone to pause long enough, true enough to say, I see your pain, you don't have to carry it alone anymore. But very few people ever do, so Aries chooses what they know best. Silence, walls, self-healing. That silence, it becomes their second language, a language without words but full of meaning. Please don't come closer if you're not real. Please don't touch if you're not planning to stay. Please don't promise if you won't keep it. For Aries, disappointment doesn't come from change. It comes from within because they truly believed you wouldn't. That feeling, it's like losing a part of themselves. So to protect what's left, they start to doubt. They learn to watch more closely, listen longer, but they walk away faster too, not because they've stopped believing in love, but because they're trying to protect what little remains of it, a tiny flame still alive but in need of shelter. What hurts Aries the most isn't the ending, it's realizing they gave everything to someone who never really valued it. They don't regret loving, they regret trusting. And from that moment on, an energetic fence goes up. You won't see it with your eyes, but you'll feel it. That's why they can be right there but feel so far away. They can smile, but you still feel the chill. They can speak, but their soul, it checked out a long time ago. You might ask, how do I get through that wall? The answer is simple, not with grand words, not with big gestures, but with consistency, repeated kindness, genuine presence, no conditions, no calculations. Aries doesn't need you to be perfect. They just need you to stay. Because to them, the most precious kind of love isn't the one that burns wild and fast, but the kind that stays warm, steady, day after day, without leaving. If you've ever loved an Aries and you've hurt them, know this, they don't hate you, but to return, you'll have to walk the road they once walked, alone. And you'll have to stay long enough to prove to them that this time, no one's leaving. When silence becomes their shield, when their heart gets used to healing itself, Aries begins living in a world that few will ever touch. A world that only opens at night when everything's quiet, when the soul is finally allowed to be soft, when the last light goes out. That's when a new dream of peace is quietly lit from within, and then gently, softly, they take a path they've known all along. No need to ask, no need to be led, just quietly, turning away from the world and walking back into themselves. No one truly understands an Aries when they begin to quietly withdraw, because they don't walk away to punish anyone, and they don't go silent to get attention. They're simply doing what their soul has whispered all along: to return to their breath, to the first heartbeat, to the purest flame, the one place where all battles go still, where there's no need to fight, where it's just them and God. No one taught Aries how to face pain. They learned to heal by instinct, and that instinct led them through a door few ever enter, the door of intentional solitude. Don't get it wrong. They're not alone because they were abandoned. They choose to be alone because the world gets too loud. Fake words, rushed hugs, connections that don't start from the soul, they wear them down. Somewhere deeper than any anger can reach, Aries longs for stillness, not to escape life, but to listen to the sacred whisper inside their chest, where they know God is gently calling them home. To Aries, solitude isn't emptiness. It's a sacred state, a ritual, like those moments of meditation beneath a golden sunset, like early mornings when they open their eyes and realize they're still alive, and they still get to choose kindness for themselves. They're not afraid of being alone, because when everything goes quiet, when no other voices remain, they can finally hear the voice of faith, the voice of the soul, the voice of a prayer with no words, yet somehow echoing into the heavens. When Aries retreats, they don't bring luggage, just the lightest things: an old journal page, an unnamed longing, a faint glimmer they believe God placed in their heart from the very beginning. And in that private space, they begin to heal, not with medicine, not with logic, but with honest presence with themselves. Alone they breathe deeper. Alone they cry without having to explain. Alone they write letters to the ones who hurt them and never send them. Then they tear them, burn them, release them to the wind, to the sky, to God, because they know forgiveness is a part of freedom. To others, loneliness might feel like a void, but to Aries, it becomes an inner sanctuary, a place they kneel, not to collapse, but to ask for strength. No one sees the nights Aries falls to the floor, in the dark, in a room where only their breath remains. No one sees their fists tighten, not from anger, but because they're trying to keep themselves from falling apart. And no one knows that in that moment, they look up and whisper just one small prayer: God, please don't leave me. They don't need answers from the universe, just a sign, a gentle dream, a morning birdsong, a soft warmth in the chest, just enough to know they're still being heard. And then they stand up, not needing anyone to lift them, not needing applause, just knowing they still have faith. The world often says loneliness is a weakness, but Aries knows loneliness is a gift, reserved only for the souls strong enough to face themselves. Not everyone has the courage to sit with sorrow, to accept the truth, and still love the parts of themselves that haven't healed yet. In that silence, they hear God more clearly than ever. No decoration, no doctrine, just a quiet voice in their heart whispering, you don't have to keep running. You are loved whether you succeed or fail. And so, solitude doesn't make them weaker. It makes them brighter, truer, strong, in a way that begins from within. The kind of strength that comes from fully accepting who they are. No one expects an Aries, the fearless one, the one who breaks every limit, to be someone who can sit for hours, just listening to their own soul. But that unseen part of them is what makes them rare, both warrior and mystic, capable of erupting in stillness, of fire and silence. They don't need the world to understand. They just need to never betray themselves again. And in that sacred moment, when the mask comes off, when the armor is laid aside, a small light begins to glow inside them. Not the light of conquest, but the light of life, of hope, of a promise from God that every soul who learns to love itself will always find its way home. And throughout that journey, if there's anything that makes Aries step back faster than anything else, it's not the lack of love, not exhaustion, not lost trust. It's the moment when the energy around them becomes too chaotic, too loud, too misaligned, and they know deeper than anyone else that if they stay in the storm too long, they'll lose the sacred part of themselves they worked so hard to protect. When the world grows too noisy and the current begins to shake the ground, Aries knows it's time to return to peace. Even if peace isn't easy, even if what lies ahead is another fire, another storm waiting to call their name again. No one can really deny this. Aries is the very first flame of the universe, and when that flame burns in anger, it can incinerate every limit in its path. They can erupt in a matter of seconds, and when something hits the edge of their pride, you'll witness a righteous fury, the kind that doesn't ask for permission. But something starts to shift as Aries grows. As they walk through deep wounds, sleepless nights, and silent collapses no one ever saw, as they go far enough to finally understand. Not every battle is worth drawing your sword for. The older Aries gets, the quieter they become, not because they feel less, not because they can't tell right from wrong, but because now they know, every time they explode in rage, they lose a sacred piece of their own energy. Anger used to be their weapon, a survival instinct, a shield to protect their softest parts. But over time, they realize something. Some people aren't worth the armor, some accusations aren't worth defending, and some places are just too low to step into, no matter how right you are. Young Aries used to burn hot in every comeback, but the Aries of today chooses silence because they've learned. Sometimes peace lies in the choice not to react. It's no longer about proving who's right or wrong. It's no longer about being seen, heard, or validated. It's a conscious decision to not let their soul get pulled into things that don't deserve them. So when Aries goes silent, it's not surrender. It's their way of saying, "I've seen enough and I'm done." That's when they turn away, no anger, no resentment, just no desire to stay, because they finally accept a truth they once resisted. The more you rage, the more you lose yourself. The more you argue, the further you drift from clarity. And so, silence becomes a new kind of armor, not cold, but dignified. A strong, sacred space within where only kindness is allowed to enter. If you've ever seen a mature Aries walk away from an argument without a single word, know this, that person isn't weak. They just forgave themselves first by not letting their heart be stained by toxic energy. Because Aries knows, if you have to scream to be heard, the other person was never really listening. And if you have to fight for every drop of understanding, that connection was already broken. So Aries withdraws, not out of fear, but because they've lived long enough to know the spiritual cost of the wrong fight at the wrong time. They know there are arguments that strip you of your soul, that every word meant to hurt costs you a piece of your compassion, that when you shout just to win, you lose the gentlest part of yourself, so they step back. They let the rage wash away like water. They place a hand on their chest and pray for peace, not just for themselves, but even for the one who hurt them, because they understand. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting, it's about setting your soul free. In their silence, God feels closer than ever, right there in the breath, in the pause after the last word, in that quiet moment when they are alone, bathed in light through the window, whispering, "Please, give me the clarity not to react like someone who's been broken." So when you see Aries go quiet, don't push them to speak. Don't force them to decide. Understand this. They're choosing what's best for both of you. They're choosing awareness, and maybe that's the greatest strength of all, knowing they could destroy but choosing not to, knowing they could speak but choosing silence, knowing they could retaliate but choosing forgiveness, not because they're weak, but because they've grown enough to know no one can steal their peace unless they allow it. There was a time Aries thought victory meant having the last word. Now they know real victory is not needing to say anything at all, because the truth will speak for itself, and that silence is where the soul begins to heal, not in applause, not in praise, but in that quiet relief of knowing they didn't betray themselves. Not everyone understands the journey of a soul like Aries, because they didn't come here to blend in. They came to wake people up, not to be like the rest, but to become a mirror of truth. And to protect that truth, they need something not everyone knows how to give: space. A space where they don't have to explain, don't have to defend, don't have to wear armor anymore. The only space where they can take off every mask and just be themselves, whole, peaceful, and quiet in the rush of the world. There are souls who don't want noise, who don't want to push through just to be seen. They just want to be still, not to disappear, but to return fully. Aries is the symbol of fire, of action, of tireless pioneering, but even fire needs a pause to slow down so it doesn't burn itself to ash. For Aries, solitude is not isolation. It's a sacred ritual of rebirth, a conscious act of sitting with themselves, to ask, Is the fire in my heart still burning from love or just obligation? The stillness they create isn't the silence of someone lost in the crowd. It's more like a sacred forest in the heart of the city, a space where time slows, breath deepens, and the heart is allowed to be soft without asking permission. In a world that demands them to be strong, fast, and always first, Aries seeks something else. A door no one knocks on, a small candle, a warm cup of tea, a song with no words, and themselves sitting quietly. No roles, no masks, and in that moment, something magical begins. They get to be who they truly are, not the warrior, not the burden bearer, not the one who's always doing fine. Just a soul learning to love itself even in its most fragile form. On the outside, they smile, they radiate, they give their all. But inside, they're waiting for someone quiet enough to hear their heart. Someone who doesn't ask too many questions, someone who doesn't need an explanation, someone who just shows up. And when that someone doesn't come, Aries returns to themselves, to their original self where nothing needs to be proven. They learn to hold themselves like a child, to soothe their own spirit, the way God whispers to their soul, "You are loved, not because you're strong, but because you are real." That's when the mask finally falls. The one they've worn for too long, strong, okay, cheerful, busy, positive. We all wear a mask like that, and we all have nights when we shut the door and face the quiet ache alone. For Aries, those moments aren't weakness. They're sacred because in that stillness, the real questions rise. Am I living in alignment with my soul? Have I sacrificed too much just to be strong? Can I forgive myself for trying so hard? And then they hear an answer, not from anyone, not out loud, just a feeling like a soft light, touching the deepest part of their heart. You don't have to be strong all the time. You just have to stay true to yourself. When Aries allows themselves to be still, they begin to regenerate their faith, their courage, their kindness to themselves. They stop doing everything for everyone. They start asking, what about me? A world that only runs on speed is not a world where souls can heal. Aries realizes if they keep running, they'll lose their humanity, so they stop, not for anyone else, but because they deserve to. Stillness isn't always comfortable at first, because it forces them to feel everything they've been avoiding, the unspoken anger, the sorrow that never dissolved, the trust that cracked, but only in that sacred space can they truly listen and begin to heal. We're often taught to always be okay, but sometimes true courage comes from saying, "I'm not okay, and I need time to recover." If you're an Aries and you feel like you need silence, step into it. No apologies, no guilt about what others might think. Just remember, a fire can only keep shining if it's tended with stillness. And if you love an Aries, give them that space. Don't pull them out of it. Let them know you're still there, quietly, patiently, sincerely, because from that deep, silent place, a new fire will be born, softer, calmer, but still brilliantly bright. No matter how strong they seem, Aries is human too, need rest. They need love that doesn't ask them to be strong. And if there's one place on earth where they can finally drop every role, it's not on a stage, it's in a sacred space. Only they know how to open from deep, deep within. But not everyone understands that, and when they feel unseen, Aries returns to their oldest strategy to protect themselves by disappearing quietly but powerfully. There's a silence in the Aries world that feels different. Not loud, not bitter, not dramatic, just absence. They disappear, no warning, no clear signs, leaving behind a space where once their fire kept someone warm with everything they had. To outsiders, it might seem cold, but no one sees. Before walking away in silence, Aries forgave more times than they could count. They stayed quiet until even their inner voice grew tired. They gave so much. They had to stop and ask themselves, do I even have anything left for me? And when the answer was no, they chose to leave, not to punish, not to hurt, but to protect the one thing they still had, their self-respect. Aries doesn't cut ties with sharp words. They cut with space, with absence, with no longer showing up where they once called home. They don't make noise. They just step back and let the silence speak for them. That silence is a quiet prayer. Please don't make me lose any more of myself. And Aries can endure a lot. They're not the type to quit, but when they leave, it means every chance is gone. Every word has lost its meaning. Deep down, they still love. They still wish the other person well. They still pray for awakening, but they won't return. not out of pride, but because going back might mean losing themselves again. They stayed too long when they should have walked away. They stayed quiet, hoping to be understood. They forgave, hoping that love alone could change everything. But no one should love so much that they forget their own limits. No one should give so much that they lose their dignity. And Aries understands. It's better late than never, so they don't stay angry. They don't carry resentment. They simply choose to walk away as an act of grace, to save what's left of a soul slowly fading. Distance to them is no longer punishment. It's breathing space. It's where they remember who they were before loving the wrong person, before trusting one too many times. Sometimes that silence holds all the unspoken sighs, the "I'm sorry" they never received, the goodbye that was never said because they knew the other wasn't ready to hear it. For Aries, not everything needs a conversation. Some endings are written in silence. And in that silence, some lessons echo louder than any words. They've learned. When someone doesn't value your presence, give them your absence. And when you constantly have to prove your worth in a relationship, that's no longer love. That's a quiet negotiation for the right to exist. Aries doesn't do that anymore. They've grown. They now know true love doesn't come from suffering. It's not measured by sacrifice. It's found in the peace of being fully yourself with someone. If that peace is gone, if your eyes don't soften when you look at each other, if your heart clenches every time you try to speak honestly, then Aries will walk away, quietly, firmly, and with full respect for themselves. To others it might look cold, but in truth it's the highest form of compassion for their own soul. Not everyone can walk that path, the path where you choose yourself, even while your heart still loves, even while you silently hope for one last embrace. But Aries can, because they know once self-respect is gone, it's hard to reclaim. And when your own soul feels abandoned by you, that wound cuts deeper than any betrayal. Aries walks away in silence, but not in confusion. They walk toward light, toward inner freedom, toward peace after all the self-blame, toward a new journey where they no longer need to wear armor just to feel loved. And if someone asks, will they come back? The answer is, only if the other person learns to honor that silence and understands. The presence of an Aries was never something to take for granted. And from every silent departure, from every act of healing in the dark, we see the true beauty of an awakened Aries soul. Not just someone brave enough to lead, but someone humble enough to step back at the right time, in the right way, with all their dignity intact. After everything Aries has walked through, after battles that felt never-ending, after collapsing in silence, then rising again on their own, they begin to realize something. Not everyone needs to understand them, and they don't need to be understood in order to keep living as who they are. Because once they've truly stepped into the journey of inner growth, Aries sees it clearly. Their worth doesn't come from outside validation. It comes from inner peace. They no longer need to win. They no longer force themselves to be the lead in a story they no longer believe in. They no longer raise their voice just to be heard. Because now they know peace in the heart is worth more than any argument out there. There was a time when Aries burned to prove themselves, to prove they were good enough, worthy enough, deserving of love, but now they don't need to. They've learned the quiet lesson God whispers only to the strongest souls. You don't need to prove your worth. You are the worth. And from that moment on, Aries steps into a new path. No longer the warrior with sword and shield, but a warrior of light. Someone who chooses silence over noise, who chooses to step back instead of fighting for attention, who chooses to live honestly instead of pleasing the whole world. The world outside is still chaotic. Some people still won't understand. Some will still leave, and challenges will still rise, calling Aries to stand up again. But this time, they don't rise to win. They rise to protect the peace they just reclaimed. The truth is, no one was born to be strong all the time. Every heart, even the bravest, has moments of fragility. Every soul, even those born to lead, sometimes longs to return, to be held, like a child. And this is what society needs to learn again. To respect someone's silence, to respect the need to retreat, to honor the moments when a person simply doesn't want to carry anything more. A truly healing world is a place where souls like Aries are allowed to be silent without being mistaken for distant, be soft without being labeled weak, step away without being accused of being heartless, and most of all, to be loved, even when they're no longer shining bright. Because if love only shows up when they burn at full flame, if care only arrives when they speak up, if presence is only valued when they give everything, then that's not love. That's a transaction. Today's Aries has learned to tell the difference between love and demands, between real connection and emotional dependence, between light and illusion. They've come home to themselves with kindness. No more blame, no more bitterness, just what truly matters, a small spark right at the center of the chest where God once placed his hand and whispered, "This is your home." Aries doesn't need anyone to rescue them anymore. They rescue themselves with stillness, with gratitude, with an inner light no one can dim. No one may see it from the outside, but you'll feel it, because real light doesn't need to perform. It just needs to be there at the right moment. If you are an Aries, if you've walked alone through long, dark nights, if you've had to hold yourself up in relationships that didn't feel real, if you've stayed quiet just to protect the human inside you, then today you are not just a survivor, you are awakened. And that is the most beautiful thing a soul can become, a warrior who loves themselves first and shares their light without needing it to be seen. Crescent Moon, thank you, a quiet warrior, for taking the time to listen, to open your heart, and to walk with me through each layer of emotion. Whether you're in silence, in healing, or just beginning to ask the deeper questions, please remember this: you are not alone. There is a light quietly growing inside you, not as bright as a spotlight, not as loud as applause, but steady, like the warmth of morning before the sun even rises. May you always find that light again, and may you always have the courage to live as your full self. No need to prove, no need to carry, because you, just as you are, have always been enough.